Differences between international versions of games are pretty common, whether it's censorship or changing in-game text. One thing about games that is usually left unchanged, however, is their soundtracks. It's pretty uncommon for a game's soundtrack to get changed between regions, although it's not impossible for that to happen. For example, Sonic CD's soundtrack was totally different between the Japanese and American releases of the game, for seemingly no reason at all. It's odd considering that there's no issues with the Japanese tracks at all. Sega just decided to make a completely different OST than the Japanese version. Speaking of Sonic CD, that's what this video is about. Sonic CD is a game about Sonic and CDs. Initially released in 1993 on the Sega CD, the Sega CD was a CD add-on for the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive. Since games were stored on a CD rather than a cartridge, it would allow for better graphics, playable FMVs, and CD audio quality for music. Sonic CD's Japanese soundtrack would be composed by Naofumi Hataya and Masafumi Ogata, while the US soundtrack would be composed by Spencer Nilsson and David Young. Comparing the two soundtracks, the Japanese one has a more funky feel to it, while the US one has a more focused or serious tone to it. But nonetheless, they both sound great. Sonic CD was also the first Sonic game to feature vocal themes, Sonic Boom and You Can Do Anything, also known as Toot Toot Sonic Warrior. Toot Toot Sonic Warrior is composed by Masafumi Ogata and sung by Kyoko Utoku for the Japanese release of the game. On the other hand, Sonic Boom was composed by Spencer Nilsson and performed by the trio Pastiche. Now, Sonic CD wouldn't be the only time a Sonic game had two different soundtracks. Sonic 3D Blast had two different soundtracks between the Genesis version and the Saturn version. This is most likely done because of the Saturn's more powerful hardware, with the ability to play better sounding audio than the Genesis's, or just improve it in 3D Blast's whole since, it's a Sonic 3D Blast. Let's focus on Sonic CD for now. Now, to find the answer to our questions, why not just ask the composers for the game? We'll probably know considering that they made the music. And the thing is, somebody has. In an interview with Sega 16, Spencer Nilsson, composer of the US soundtrack, he suggested that Sega of America wanted to change the soundtrack to have something a little bit more musically rich and complex, which absolutely makes no sense to me considering that the Japanese soundtrack is fine on its own. There was no need to make it more complex and musically rich. Spencer also brings up the use of female vocals in some of the tracks, like Tidal Tempest or Sonic Boom. He says that this was most likely done to add a subliminal look to help introduce the first canon female character in the Sonic series, being Amy Rose, also known as Sally Acorn, according to Spencer. Again, this doesn't make that much sense, considering that this is such an arbitrary thing to change, but the composer of the US version of the game said this himself. It has to be true, right? Yes, it could be, but let's open our surroundings a bit and consider some of the other reasons why the soundtracks were changed. Technically speaking, there's no real definitive answer to this question. The general consensus is that Sega changed the soundtracks to appeal to the American market for the game, since apparently the Japanese soundtrack wouldn't appeal to the American children or something. Well, sure, the vocal themes for the games would have sounded a bit weird at first to some child in the 90s. I mean, Sonic R's OST was ridiculed at first, but now everybody loves it. This, to me, is probably the reason that makes the most sense, since it seems more in line with the Americanization of Sonic in the 90s, with Sega of America wanting Sonic to seem hip and cool and not some weird Japanese rat creature. This could have also contributed to the 2-month delay for the game in the US, with it releasing in Japan of September of 1993, with the US version releasing in November of 1993. Aside from that, another theory suggests that the soundtrack was changed due to a new sound studio opening around that time, and Sega probably wanting to get some mileage out of it by composing new tracks for the latest Sonic release. I couldn't find any sources backing this up, however, so I just take that with a grain of salt. Wouldn't it be impossible for that to be the case? Anyways, that's all I really have to say about the localization of Sonic CD. It's pretty interesting and makes you really think. It looks like we still have some video left to cover, so this gives me an opportunity to talk about something else, essentially like a post-credit scene. Back when I made my bizarre discography of Sonic video, which I recommend watching, I had thought I had touched upon every single bizarre album that I could find, but recently I discovered another album which I forgot to discuss in that video, so let's talk about it. In 1997, a live musical will be performed multiple times at the now defunct Sega World Sydney. 25 minutes in length, Sonic Live in Sydney would be one of the main attractions of Sega World Sydney for a while. with the show being a live musical performance featuring Sonic characters, the main cast being Sonic, Tails, Sally Acorn, and Dr. Robotnik. They would be portrayed in costumes with the actors inside of them. Few photos actually exist of the costumes, as the whole show remains lost media, with no recordings of the show ever taken. Besides that, we do have a plot synopsis. The plot revolves around Sonic, Tails, and Sally Acorn flying to Sydney after the Death Egg crashes into Sydney. Basically, Sonic, Tails, and Sally need to stop Robotnik from taking over the world. Anyway, the show itself included 3 different musical numbers: What Are We Waiting For?, Give Me Chaos, and Thank You for Being You. These musical numbers would be sung by the actors performing as the main characters. For example, Give Me Chaos would be sung by Dr. Robotnik's actor. The CD release of the album would contain 4 different tracks, with the 4th one being an audio recording of the entire show. Nothing much to say on the album cover itself, as it's pretty basic, but it's interesting as they featured Knuckles on the cover, with Knuckles not being featured in the show at any point. Maybe it was just a little goof up. Well, if you stuck around for this last part of the video, good for you. Now you can become a Sonic geek just like me. Anyway, this was just a shorter video as I wanted to experiment more with content types, but who cares really? Anyway, subscribe for more Sonic videos or whatever, and I'll just end the video now because I can't think of any more things to say.